Although there was opposition to Muhammad's claim on the Kaaba, and later, there arose opposition to his mission engendered by his increasing insults, there is no report of any assault or injury caused to him or to his disciples by the Quraysh. There are some isolated references of torture of some slaves of the Quraysh, who had joined Muhammad's insulting creed. But, those were never serious or life-threatening. In other instances, some Quraysh had prevented their family members, sometimes by locking them at home, from joining Muhammad's community. A few testimonies left by Muslim chroniclers prove that the Quraysh instead showed remarkable tolerance against Muhammad's overtly hostile attitude and offensive invectives. Al-Zuri records. The unbelievers of the Quraysh did not oppose what he, Muhammad, said. If he passed the place where they sat together, they pointed to him and said, "This young man of the tribe of Abd al-Muttalib proclaims a message from heaven." This they continued to do until Allah began to attack their gods, and until he proclaimed that their fathers who died in unbelief were lost, to hellfire. Then they began to hate the Prophet and show their enmity to him. Although Muhammad's message was hostile and insulting to the religion, gods, and customs of the Quraysh, his invitation to them for embracing Islam was turned down rather politely. In one instance, Muhammad's uncle Abu Talib, while passing by a place, found his young son Ali praying with Muhammad. He inquired Ali what he was doing. To this the Prophet replied, he, Ali, was following the teaching revealed to him by God, and invited Abu Talib to follow suit. To this invitation, the old man replied that he could not give up the faith of his fathers, nor could he join in devotions which required placing his backside above his head, i.e., prostration while praying. XXI. The reaction of the Quraysh to Muhammad's slanderous invectives at their gods and ancestors is recorded by Bayhaqi in his book Proof of Prophecy as a testimony of Amru ibn Laas, a disciple of Muhammad. I was once present when the chief among the idolaters assembled at the Kaaba. They were discussing Allah's apostle, and said, "Never have we had to tolerate from anyone what we have had to tolerate from this man. He slanders our fathers, criticizes our religions and divides our people, and blasphemes our gods. Such grievous things have we tolerated from this man, the Prophet." XX Sharma SS, 2004, Caliphs and Sultans, Religious Ideology and Political Praxis, Rupa and Co., New Delhi, p. 63, Muir, p. 63. XXI Glub JB, Glub Pasha, 1979, The Life and Times of Muhammad, Hodder and Stoughton, London, p. 98. Who was nearby and hearing this conversation, he responded, "Men of Quraysh, I will surely repay you for this with interest." XXII. Despite the fact that the Quraysh adamantly stuck to their ancestral religion and were opposed to Muhammad's mission, they allowed Muhammad to enter the Kaaba as late as in the 6th year of his mission. It becomes clear from the drama of the satanic verses Quran 53:19-20, the plot of Salman Rushdie's novel. According to the history of Al-Tabari, the two satanic verses in which Muhammad accepted the pagan deities Al-Lat, Al-Uwa, and Al-Manat as worthy of worship, were allegedly thrown into Muhammad's mouth by Satan, which Allah later repudiated. Quran 53:21-22. XXIII. This occurred when Muhammad was holding a reconciliation meeting with Quraysh elders inside the Kaaba in 616. XXIV. After the Hudaybiyah Treaty in 628, the Quraysh again allowed Muhammad and his entourage to enter the Kaaba for 3 days every year to perform the pilgrimage, see below. Now, let us consider a similar hypothetical situation in present-day context. Suppose a man from any community of Mecca, or elsewhere in Saudi Arabia, or from anywhere in the world, goes to Mecca and declares in front of an assembly of Muslims that he has received revelations from the true God, that he is the true messenger, that Islam is false, that the Kaaba is the sanctuary of his own God, and that Muslims should abandon their false creed and embrace his new religion. One should have no difficulty in figuring out what would happen to this alleged new prophet. Obviously, that person might suffer instantaneous death. Indeed, if a person openly makes such a claim in any major mosque in any Muslim country, he will most likely embrace the same fate at the hands of zealous followers of Islam even today, despite having the guarantee of free speech and human rights under the UN Charter. It is easy to draw a comparison of the fervent tendency toward violence amongst today's Muslims with that of those allegedly wretched and wicked pagans of Mecca of that so-called barbarian age. They never made any physical assault on Muhammad for almost 13 years, despite his continued insult of their religion and culture, and his claim on their most sacred shrine. Of the impact of Muhammad's prophetic mission on the life and religion of the Quraysh, notes Sir William Muir, their shrine, the glory of Mecca and the center of pilgrimage from all of Arabia, was in danger of being set at naught. XXV Even then the Quraysh permitted Muhammad to enter the Kaaba, while non-Muslims are barred even today from entering any mosque, forget about Kaaba, in Muslim countries even for a visit. Ever since the founding of Islam to this day, non-Muslims have been XX Sharma, p. 63-64. XXI Al-Tabari, Vol. 6, p. 107. XXIV Ibid, p. 165-67, Muir, p. 80. XXV Muir, p. 62. Barred from entering the city of Mecca and Medina, the two holiest cities of Islam. A number of French citizens were murdered in February 2007 who happened to be in the prohibited zone near Medina. XXVI The intolerant teachings of Islam have transformed such an amazingly tolerant and civilized people of the 7th century Arabia into such a fanatic and murderous lot. Not only the Arabs, but Muslims anywhere in the world today carry forward the legacy of Islam with similar intolerance and bigotry. And Muhammad used to call those highly tolerant and civilized people of the 7th century Mecca cruel, wicked, and wretched, as do Muslims of our time. Even today, Muslims in many Islamic countries kill those who openly leave Islam, despite the fact that all Muslim countries have signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the UN Charter, which guarantees one's right to change one's belief as one chooses. But the pagans of the 7th century Mecca never caused any harm either to Muhammad or to those dozens of free citizens of Mecca, who had converted to his creed. Evidently, Muslims of today are much more intolerant, cruel, and uncivilized as compared to those Quraysh pagans of Mecca. Exemplary tolerance of Meccans. The society of Mecca at the time of Muhammad was decidedly backward and unsophisticated than the more advanced and civilized societies of Persia, Syria, Egypt, and India. The people of Mecca were also a deeply religious community. However, it is tolerance, harmony, and accommodation, not intolerance, hatred and violence toward people of different faiths that characterized those allegedly barbarian people. For example, although the Kaaba was their venerated house of God and the heart of their religious devotion, they never considered it solely of their own. Instead, they had allowed all the religious sects of the region and neighboring countries, southern Arabia, Mesopotamia, Palestine, Syria, and other places afar, to place their religious symbols and idols in the sanctuary of the sacred shrine. XXVII Since Mecca was an important center of trades and frequent stopover for merchants from far lands, the Meccans were accommodative of the spiritual needs of those foreign merchants. They housed the idols and religious symbols of the foreigners in the Kaaba, enabling them to perform their religious devotions while in Mecca. These ancient idols from various lands and faiths had formed circles of 360 monolithic figures in the sanctuary of the Kaaba. Even effigies of Abraham and Ishmael and of Mary with the infant Jesus were housed in the Kaaba, representing the Jewish and Christian faiths. When Muhammad conquered Mecca, he ordered the destruction of the idols housed in the sanctuary. According to Turkish Muslim historian Emil Ezen, Muhammad allowed the despoiling of the effigy of Abraham and Ishmael but protected that of Mary and Jesus by covering it with his hands. XXVIII The Quraysh hosted the Jewish and Christian symbols in the Kaaba despite the fact that Christians and Jews perennially rebuked the pagans for their idolatrous practices. The Syrian XXVI Globe and Mail, Canada, gunmen slay 3 Frenchmen in Saudi Arabia, February 26, 2007. XXVII Walker, p. 44. XXVIII Eason E, 1963, Mecca the Blessed, Medina the Radiant, Ellick, London, p. 109. Merchants were propagating Christianity in Mecca at the time of Muhammad without facing any hostility from the Quraysh. XXIX Indeed, a number of Quraysh had converted to Christianity. The prominent amongst them were Waraka ibn Nawfal and Uthman ibn Huwayrith, who enjoyed respected and privileged position in Mecca, see below. Despite Muhammad's intense hatred and insult of the Quraysh's religion, Muslims were permitted to enter the Kaaba for performing pilgrimage therein, as already cited. Even the Hindus of India, who worshipped a different set of idols, had access into the sacred Kaaba. Indian merchants brought the idol monolith of goddess Al-Manat from the Kaaba, which had disappeared from the shrine, to Somnath, India, where it became a popular deity. The pious Muslim conqueror Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni determined to wipe out the remaining vestige of idolatry of the Kaaba. Attacked Somnath in 1024 for destroying that idol. In trying to protect their revered idol, some 50,000 Hindus perished. XXX. Given these facts, those pagans of Mecca were obviously a more tolerant, accommodative, and civilized people than Muslims of today. Despite so much irreverence shown and insults hurled by Muhammad toward the religion, gods, and customs of the Quraysh, they put up with him for 13 years. The only cruelty they had shown to him was the 2-year social and economic blockade to Muhammad's community, 617-619, considered very much a civilized measure for dealing with such cases even today. In terms of compassion, tolerance, accommodation, and nonviolence, the idolaters of the 7th century Mecca were evidently quite a civilized people even by today's standard, despite the unsophisticated and backward nature of their society even at that time. In sum, the pagans of Mecca, badly vilified by Muslims for the last 14 centuries, were a very tolerant and civilized people. Muhammad's campaign of terror against Meccans, 623-630. Prophet Muhammad's relocation to Medina turned out to be a blessing for the success of his prophetic mission. This was a very likely outcome given that Musab ibn Umayr's prior mission, even in Muhammad's absence, was successful in drawing a large number of converts to Islam. The Prophet arrived at Medina to a hero's welcome from his eagerly waiting disciples. Medina was populated by a number of pagan and Jewish tribes, the latter being richer and more influential. Soon more and more citizens of Medina, mostly from the pagan tribes, started joining his mission. XXIX Tagger J. 1998, Christians in Muslim Egypt, a historical study of the relations between Copts and Muslims from 640 to 1922, TRS. Mocker RN, Boris Verlag, Altenberga, P16. XXX Sharma SS, 2004, Caliphs and Sultans, Religious Ideology and Political Praxis, Rupa and Co., New Delhi, P 144-45. The seeding of jihad. According to Ibn Ishaq, within the RST year of his relocation to Medina, Muhammad had signed a treaty with the tribes of the city, which famously became known as the Constitution of Medina. This treaty contained clauses underpinning Muhammad's violent intent, particularly against the Quraysh. XXXI2 such clauses were: 1. No believer shall be put to death for the blood of an Indal, neither shall any Indal be supported against Muslims. 2. The polytheists of Medina shall not take the property or person of the Quraysh under his protection, nor shall intervene against Muslims. These clauses of the treaty clearly suggest that Muhammad had arrived in Medina with the intent of launching a violent campaign against the Quraysh of his ancestral city, which soon ensued. Muhammad spent about 6 months to build a communal abode for his community. Once settled himself in, he turned attention to seek revenge against the Quraysh. It appears that Muhammad's disciples were opposed to engaging in violence. Allah came to Muhammad's assistance, revealing a array of violence-inciting verses, urging Muslims to engage in jihad or holy war, initially against the Quraysh and later against all non-Muslims. To convince Muhammad's unwilling disciples, Allah sent down a tailor-made verse, sanctioning ding as a religious duty: fight in the cause of Allah those who ghtu, but do not transgress limits, for Allah loveth not transgressors. Quran 2:190. Until this point, there was no ding between Muslims and the Quraysh. The Quraysh, however, had adamantly opposed Muhammad's mission, which could be equated to ding. Therefore, ding the Quraysh became divinely sanctioned to Muslims. For those who still had concerns about the legitimacy of engaging in unprovoked violence, Allah made it easy for them to, as he revealed, and slay them wherever ye catch them, and turn them out from where they have turned you out, for tumult and oppression are worse than slaughter. Quran 2:191. Since the Quraysh had fought Muhammad and drove him out committing a crime tantamount to worse than slaughter, fighting them, therefore, had become more than legitimate for the sake of justice. Hence, the believers should have no ethical scruples about fighting the Quraysh, because they, fighting the Quraysh, were only rendering justice in the cause of Allah. Allah exhorts them to fight resolutely, which will continue until justice and faith in Allah, i.e., Islam, predominates, and fight them on until there is no more tumult or oppression, and there prevail justice and faith in Allah. Quran 2:193. Before moving further, let us investigate what tumult or oppression in these verses stands for. IIBN Ishaq, p. 231-33, What W.M., Muhammad in Medina, Oxford University Press, Karachi, 2004 imprint, p. 221-25.